I challenged Tyler Budge on his lists about Kyle McCord and Fran Brown, and now he's on, and it's time to debate.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Locked On Syracuse Podcast. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we are joined by Tyler Budge, who created some lists recently that ruffled a few feathers, including my own, about Kyle McCord and Fran Brown. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, Tyler, first and foremost, before we get into the whole Kyle McCord and Fran Brown discussion, I want to just say thank you. You having the courage to come onto the podcast takes a lot to, create those lists, and you easily could have said, no, I don't want to, or ignored me, but thank you for agreeing to the challenge.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on, Jackson. I was saying it in a video earlier today. I respect the guts it takes to publicly call someone out like that, invite them to the podcast, just say, hey, let's talk about it. So at my core, I love talking college football. So any opportunity for some additional discussion, I'm 100% open to. So thanks for inviting me on.
Awesome, Tyler. And let's just get right to the chase. Everyone's watching, everyone listening wants to get right to it. So why is Kyle McCord 11th on your list in the ACC quarterback rankings?
Yeah, so just to make sure I knew where you were coming from and knew where your headspace was at, I watched your other podcast where you kind of reacted to the list. And I do think right off the bat, there's a few kind of misconceptions about my list specifically. And I'll explain some of the mechanical things from that list. But yeah, he's 11th. He's 11th in my power rankings of the ACC quarterbacks. I make a college football preview every season. So the reason that list came to be is because I just finished my ACC preview and the quarterback power rankings in there. So Kyle McCord, I think he was great at Ohio State. He had genuinely great numbers, no disputing that. He did also have some elite weapons, and I know that's something you kind of picked up on, other people pick up on. Yes, future NFL lineman everywhere, generational prospect in Marvin Harrison Jr., Cade Stover at tight end, that's going to be an NFL guy, Egbuka, Fleming, so many guys on that team that are future NFL guys. I didn't even talk about the running backs. You got Henderson and Williams as well. And so for that reason, I understand why people are really high on him. You've seen what you see. He put up some gaudy numbers there. However, at the end of the day, he was a limitation for the Ohio State offense. And we saw that throughout the season. They had an elite defense. They had a championship caliber defense and a defensive effort that I think was wasted with a guy that severely limited their offense because of his lack of mobility. The second this guy was forced off his spot at all and was uncomfortable at all, he became much more inaccurate. And behind an elite offensive line in Ohio State, he was able to get away with it for the most part. If you watch some of those big games, I mean, my goodness, Marvin Harrison Jr. made some crazy plays. I don't think they beat Penn State last season if they don't have Marvin. There's probably a couple other games that would have been a lot closer. But I think there's no denying he was not bad. He was great last season. And based on the 11th ranking in the spot, I know you alluded to the fact that I was saying he was going to be bad and downright awful this season. That's not my opinion at all. I don't think he's going to be awful. I think there are definitely quarterbacks below him that are going to be awful in the ACC. Like Virginia could totally flame out with Calandria or Musket, especially if they can't stay healthy. Pitt is going to be in a horrific spot. Yep. At Stanford, I'm not too crazy about their quarterback situation they got going on. But I know we'll go through the list because I know you had some guys you said you were okay with being above McCord and other guys you were okay with.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one guy that I conceded was definitively concede was Cam Ward. I definitively agree. He is the top quarterback in the ACC. But then there's that next tier of players where I was like, I think this is where Kyle McCord best is, because I understand that Kyle McCord had great weapons, but I don't think that any Power 5 quarterback could have just gone into Ohio State and won all but one of their games. I get it, but I promise you, Syracuse's last quarterback, Garrett Schrader, there is no way that they're going, 11-1 with Garrett Schrader? Not a chance. So I get it from that standpoint. I put Kyle McCord in the tier with Kyron Drones, who's a very good player, and he's more of a runner, but he can also throw a little bit. Haynes King, who I actually said on the podcast, I agreed with you on Haynes King. I think he is pretty underrated. He does have a high turnover rate, but he makes up for it with 10 rushing touchdowns last year and over 700 yards. I think you're a little bit low on DJ. I've never been a huge fan of DJ. People that know me personally, I won't say it on the podcast, but I have a nickname for him that I won't say. But
okay.
I am I've never been that big of a fan, but at the same time, when I look at the rest of the ACC, DJ to me is someone who he's proven last 2 years, 3-1 touchdown interception ratio. He did it at Oregon State too. That's not Clemson weapons. I think you're a little bit too low on him. And Cade Klubnik, I'm actually maybe a little higher than most, because I think that he does have that potential. He's a former high recruit, only 1 year at starting. He could have a big year. But the point being is that I put Kyle McCord in that tier. So by that logic, if you just add them up, Cam Ward plus those four and Kyle McCord, I have him at 6th.
Yeah.
Obviously 11th for you. Who
Exactly.
Why are some other guys like Thomas Castellanos, who stinks, and Fernando Mendoza and Tyler Shuck ahead of him?
So I think one of the key differences in our philosophies for our rankings is there's some context which I categorize these quarterbacks in that I just don't know if we're thinking about the same way. For example, in the case of DJ Uiagalelei, you said at Oregon State, his weapons were worse than Clemson. I think he was in a significantly better spot at Oregon State. And I think he's going to be in a similar spot at Florida State. At Oregon State, he had a better offensive line than he had at Clemson, because Oregon State, literally, Talisi Fuaga, he's going to go in the first round, or I think it's pronounced like Talise. I always mispronounce his name. You had Joshua Gray. You had Tanner Miller. You had a ton of All-American, All-Conference guys in that O-line. Clemson didn't have that. Clemson also had a horrible offensive coordinator who's since been fired in favor of Garrett Riley. So DJ was in a significantly better situation at Oregon State. That's the kind of things where I think there's kind of a disconnect. You talk about a guy like Haynes King, giving him his flowers, obviously. I think he was phenomenal in Georgia Tech. That was his first year in that system. I think he's only going to improve. Same with Kyron Drones, another guy that was a transfer last season. It was his first year in the system. He still looked great. The way they turned a corner toward the back half of the season was great. But, there's no point in talking about those guys because you said, you can take it or leave it. You already have those guys above them. We can talk about some of the other guys that maybe you're not so crazy about. So full transparency, for every quarterback, I rate them on a scale of 1 to 15. No quarterback really gets a 1. That's like the worst of the worst. 15's superstar quarterbacks.
I think I could think of a few Syracuse guys who sorry for my voice, by the way. I'm recovering from an illness. But
no worries.
Yeah, I can think of a few Syracuse guys who might get a 1 on your scale.
Yeah. So on one hand, Kyle McCord is just the victim of that rating system, resulting in a bunch of guys that are rated as a 10 out of 15. That was my score for Kyle McCord. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he's going to be even mid. 10 out of 15, I still think that's a solid signal caller. I think it's deep in the ACC. Fernando Mendoza, one spot above him, I gave him a 10. Castellanos, a 10. DJ, a 10. Shuck, a 10. So there is a 5-way tie for me for 7th, technically. Okay. However, there are some things that cause me to flip those guys back and forth. So in the case of Tyler Shuck, I heard you mention in your other podcast, you said he's never been a full-time starter. That's not true. He has been a full-time starter multiple cases, including last season. The issue for him has been injuries. He's been injured his whole career.
I think, what I meant on that was like he's never been a full-time starter throughout an entire season.
Which is what I assumed you meant. Yeah. So that is obviously a concern. However, when he is healthy, and I tend to be an optimist, I'm banking on him staying healthy. I want him to stay healthy. I think he's a phenomenal difference maker. I think he is just a really big key player. What he can do with his legs, what he can do with his arm strength is crazy stuff. And in a Jeff Brom offense, seeing what he did with Jack Plummer and Aiden O'Connell with that offense, I just really see the potential and really like the weapons that Shuck has around him. And so for that reason, I'm a little bit higher than him than I am on other people. That's the differentiator that kind of rises Shuck up there to 7. And I know there's a chance Shuck doesn't even start this season. There is a really talented, I believe he's a freshman at Louisville that I know they're still battling it out.
Here's where I push back on you here, because Tyler Shuck, you just said he might not even start next season, and you still have him ahead of Kyle McCord, who's definitely going to start next year. Like that is the disconnect here is that Kyle McCord to me is a proven commodity. We know what Kyle McCord is, and we know some of his limitations. I am concerned about his lack of mobility, especially behind a Syracuse offensive line that is not going to be the same as Ohio State. I get that. But Tyler Shuck, he might not even start, to your point. Now, what about Thomas Castellanos? What about him? Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, just to go back to Tyler Shuck a little bit, I say he might not start. I think he's going to start, but I'm aware that there's buzz for another guy on Louisville. If he starts, I think he's going to put up similar numbers and look pretty good as well. But Shuck is a guy that I think if he starts in that Louisville offense, he's going to be a top half quarterback in the ACC. So I have him up there. That's my projection and prediction for Shuck. For Castellanos, he sucks. Oh, he's terrible. He's tragically bad. I'm aware he struggled with his arm.
I watched that game between Syracuse and Boston College, and I wish I didn't watch that game. It was awful.
Yeah, which, I respect your love for Syracuse, and I can see you're very passionate about them and well-connected with Syracuse, but he played more games than that Syracuse game throughout the season. The game against Florida State, he was phenomenal. He had some other ones down the stretch. Castellanos is a guy that I see a lot of potential with. He is phenomenal with his legs. He really kills guys. He honestly reminds me of Avery Johnson at Kansas State, where the arm strength just isn't quite there yet. The passing as a young quarterback is a little spotty. Decision-making is questionable. But what they can do with their legs and how mobile they are and able to get outside the pocket and operate out of structure, so promising. And then the other key differentiator for Castellanos, I'm not just banking blindly on his development. He's also a first-year guy that transferred over there. He's getting used to the offense with another year. I believe he came from UCF. Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien is the man on campus coaching Boston College. And I really trust Bill O'Brien as an offensive coordinator. There was some spottiness at Alabama, but at the end of the day, I think he orchestrated a really strong offense. Yes, that was with Bryce Young, but I think that the development he can do, he's also a guy that won the AFC South like 5 times with some pretty good quarterback play as well. I really trust the development that Castellanos can go under, and I just think that'll be a big differentiator for him this season, and he was phenomenal in some games. To say he's garbage, yeah, he was garbage in a couple games. You're going to have that inconsistency from a young player. His potential is something that makes me salivate, and I hate Boston College, so I don't like to say that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think at this point, we understand where our disagreements lie. You're more about maybe potential, if that's fair to say, whereas I'm more of, I'm going to take the proven commodity in Kyle McCord because I have a feeling like I know what he's going to give. I can check back in November with Thomas Castellanos and Tyler Shuck and Fernando Mendoza for that matter. I'm curious though, Tyler, how do you mentioned your rankings go from 1 through 15. What goes in behind that?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go in, but essentially there's a comparison to be made about their stats from last season. That's always a thing that factors in how productive they were. If there's a change in offensive coordinator, what is that going to do to them statistically speaking? What is that going to do to them schematically speaking? Drake May, I didn't have, like, I think I barely had him in my top 10 quarterbacks last season because I was like, there's going to be a regression in this new season. There just is.
Wait, statistically. You had Drake May in your what?
And then statistically, he wasn't up there.
Well, no, he wasn't up there, but he's going to be a top 5 pick in the draft, which this episode is going to air. Wait, so this episode is airing on Friday, so he would have already gone inside the top 5.
That's true. He would have. I'm not ranking quarterbacks based on how well they're going to do in the NFL. I'm ranking college quarterbacks. I could give a damn about the NFL. The reality of the situation is they brought in a new offensive coordinator named Chip Lindsey who wanted to establish the run. It's going to benefit North Carolina this season because they're not going to have Drake May. That's what Mac Brown was preparing for. They lost their offensive coordinator, so they brought in Chip Lindsey. And you look at his stats from the season prior to this last season, there was a big regression because they didn't let him operate and do his thing. They established the run. Omarion Hampton is a household name at running back now. So that's the reality, is looking at those external factors. And yes, on paper, you could just look at it and say, wow, he put up great stats last season. He's just going to do it again. There's a lot of other factors at play: changes in coordinator, changes in scheme, changes in the things going on around them, where they're transferring, what they're doing. And so those are the key things you got to look at. I know you also, slandered Preston Stone and Grayson McCall just because they're coming from the group of 5 level. I think that just basing something on that is pretty ridiculous, especially when you see some guys that have not only made the jump from the group of 5, but from the FCS level to some of the best in our game. You got Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders from Jackson State and Incarnate Word. So I think basing an argument just on that, I understand you're looking at the stats. You're a big stats guy, but there's a lot of external factors and other things that have to be taken into consideration when looking at these quarterbacks.
Well, we'll brush aside the Drake May thing because he was definitely one of the top 2 to 3, if not 1.
Yeah, as far as an NFL prospect, 100%.
I think regardless, but we'll shred that aside. This isn't a North Carolina podcast, but I understand what you're saying. Like, hey, it's been done before. FCS, low end Division I, whatever it is, up into a Power 5 conference, which is going to be the Power 4 next year. I understand that argument, but it goes back to our differences in philosophy, which is that I'm more of someone who I have seen Kyle McCord in the Power 5 at Ohio State excel. He was top 10 in the nation in QBR. I have seen it from him, and I get it. Syracuse is different. I've said it a million times. I've seen it with Kyle McCord, whereas with these other guys, I haven't. I want you to prove it. I want Grayson McCall, prove it. Just not against Syracuse, of course, but prove that you're better rather than we're going to just anoint him right away. Let's go now to Fran Brown. Let's talk about Fran Brown and your coaching rankings, because you had him 14th and the way you decided it was very interesting. So why don't you describe to us how you decided these coaching rankings?
Yeah, once again, I think a pretty clear disconnect. Starting with the quote tweet I had of your tweet, you commented, but your criteria was impact, not resume, you idiot. I get it. It's the internet. You didn't know you were ever going to meet me face to face. I've probably called a billion people an idiot on the internet.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
If we look at the exact, you're okay. If we look at the exact thing I said main criteria for the rankings is not resume, but current impact as a head coach. Okay. The key word there being main criteria, not only criteria, main criteria.
Okay.
Now, full transparency, I absolutely hate doing coach rankings because of disconnects like this and because of miscommunications like this. How should you rank coaches? If I just rank coaches based on resume, and I said, I'm going to rank all the coaches 1 through 17 in the ACC based on resume, it would be number 1, Dabo Swinney. He's won multiple national titles. It would be number 2, Mac Brown. He won a national title 20 years ago in North Carolina. Do I think those are the 2 best coaches in the ACC right now? Like, Dabo Swinney at Clemson has underwhelmed the last 4 years. He's clearly hurting his team by not using the transfer portal. That wouldn't be how I feel, and that wouldn't be how a lot of people I know feel. There's a reason Alabama fans were down bad when they thought Dabo was going to be their new head coach potentially. That's not the way to rank coaches. So the way I choose to judge it is based on their impact on the team. And the reason Fran Brown falls so low on that list is because, yes, he's a great recruiter. We know that. Yes, he's shifting the culture. Yes, I'm sure all Syracuse fans have felt his impact, and maybe that's why the wording hurts Syracuse fans so much.
The wording is what gets me here.
But when I'm talking about impact, I'm talking about tangible changes on the field. And for Fran Brown, we haven't seen that yet. So I can't, in good faith, put him in the top half of the ACC over guys like the guy right above him, Justin Wilcox, a guy we've seen go to multiple bowl games, win 8 games at Cal, take a team that has really been struggling and put them in a slightly better spot. A guy like Mac Brown that is still sustaining this team at North Carolina and cranking out wins. Yes, maybe underwhelming with Drake May a little bit. That holds him from coming up a little bit, holding back Drake May from maybe that potential as a top guy, which he is. I'll say it. I just think that the disconnect is that I'm not ranking on resume purely. I know you said you should judge them based on winning football games. That's also a horrible way to do it.
What?
Lance Leipold. Do you know who Lance Leipold is?
Not off the top of my head right now.
Okay, he's Kansas's head coach. He is 17-21 in his career at Kansas, and yet people have him as a top 10 coach in America. Why is that?
Yeah, why is that? That's very confusing.
Because of his impact on the Kansas Jayhawks. He took.
But are they winning football games?
They are now, but he has a record below 500. Do you know who has the best record percentage-wise in all of college football right now?
Is it Dabo Sweeney?
It's Ryan Day. Ryan Day. So is he the best coach in college football based on wins and losses?
Okay, I think the thing is with the wins and losses thing is that it has to matter at least something. Like,
and I agree. That's why Fran Brown's at 14.
Ryan Day may not be the number one coach in college football, but he's top 5 for sure. I can't name 5 coaches.
I think there's an argument between him and Lance Leipold, which completely debunks any just look at the win-loss thing, because Lance Leipold's under 500. Chris Kleiman, I always mispronounce his last name. He's the Kansas State head coach. His record's not very pretty either. I think he's a better coach than Ryan Day. He's won a Big 12 title at Kansas State. It's not the NFL. You're not dealing with the same pool of resources and the same conference schedules and all that stuff. It's completely different in college football. Judging a coach solely based on his wins and losses, that's not a way to do it. It should be factored in. You should look at their team history, program history, how high they're performing above where their program should be performing. But wins and losses, that's not the way to just judge a coach at the college level.
We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Okay, we're just going to agree to disagree on this one, because here's the thing. I understand there are other factors here. And by the way, I did say on the podcast that if you were judging it on wins and losses, then Fran Brown at 14th, I totally understand, because, well, he hasn't coached. His record's 0-0. So it's kind of one of those things I said on the podcast where, look, you just have to throw him at the bottom and you have to prove that you deserve to be higher than the bottom. But you said the main criteria was impact. And you even conceded that the recruiting that Syracuse has done is certainly impactful. Today, 24/7 Sports recently released their rankings of 2026. I get it's a long ways away, and I made the joke to someone that, man, Syracuse football, we're going to be great in 2028. But anyways, they have a composite 5-star linebacker coming in, Isaiah Williams, who is a top 20 overall player in the country. If Fran Brown is not here, this was Dino Babers, there is zero chance they get any sort of player like that. We are already seeing the impact from him. 5 4-star recruits in one class, which may not sound like a lot, but I tracked it with Syracuse. It hasn't been done since 24/7 Sports released their stars in 2011.
That's correct.
So I just think that impact, Fran Brown has already made a bigger impact than a lot of other coaches in the ACC, and he hasn't coached a game yet. That is my opinion here.
I'm just telling you, you can't measure the impact until he goes out and actually starts playing some games to a certain extent. You can measure it to an extent of, yeah, he hasn't coached a game yet, but wow, what he's done in this offseason, recruiting-wise, he's doing things Syracuse has never done. That's great. You know who's a guy who recruits better than Fran Brown? Mario Cristobal.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Mario Cristobal.
Yeah.
Where you have him at 6th?
Yeah, I think I have him at 6.
Did you not see the Georgia Tech game?
I know people love the semantics and they love to boil it down to a play. His play calling is questionable. That's one of the things that holds him back. However, you can't deny the guy has shown an ability to win with the talent in the past. He was able to do it at Oregon, at Miami. He's churning things in the right direction. I think they could be primed for a big season. But overall, I look at him and I say his impact on Miami, I think it's overall positive, and I think that he's got them in the right direction. And this season, I think we'll probably see that. It's kind of a similar thing to Brent Pry, where I'm seeing the impact. You see how things are turning and the way their season's shaping up this season. Well,
we better see it with Mario Cristobal this year, because all I remember, I believe he's 500 in 2 years with Miami, which is not very good.
Yeah, 5-7 and then 7-6.
Well, he should have been 8-4 because, for those that may not know, there was a play against Georgia Tech that Miami lost, where Miami had, if you do the math, had just kneeled the ball down, they would have won the football game. Georgia Tech was out of timeouts. There was nothing they could do. If you just kneel, you win. Instead, Mario Cristobal is the head coach. He's going to get the blame. Decides to call a running play. Miami fumbles, and then Georgia Tech wins in like 2 plays. And it was in Miami. If you haven't seen that clip, go watch it right now after this podcast ends. So
he had a very similar thing happen at a game I was at in I want to say 2018 or 2019 was probably against Stanford. It was college game day. They could have won the game at the end. They ran it one more time. They fumbled it. Stanford ended up winning in overtime. So he has a history of doing that.
It's just simple math. I promise you, Tyler, here's something you might agree with me on this. I think some of these coaches need to play some Madden. Some Madden. You'll learn how to manage
clock management.
Playing Madden. But anyways, we have a little bit of time left on this podcast. We've talked about Kyle McCord. We've talked about Fran Brown. We're never going to agree. That's okay. And we'll check back probably in November and see what's going on here. You say in your Twitter account that you are the father of the MacGuffin. And the MacGuffin is obviously a very weird name, and I'm kind of familiar about it. But I wanted to ask you, what is the MacGuffin?
Yeah, so the MacGuffin can be hard to explain sometimes, but the best way to describe it is like the lineal championship belt of college football, or the transitive property. Essentially, it is a concept that when Rutgers and Princeton played the very first game back in 1869, a fictional award was created called the MacGuffin that Rutgers was given after winning the first game. And then Rutgers gets to carry the glorious MacGuffin until somebody beats them, in which case they get the right to take it, like a title belt. And so I took the liberty in one summer, and I think it was also 2019, of tracking where that would go from 1869 all the way to the present day. Michigan has it right now. They just beat Washington in the national title, ending a pretty impressive Washington streak. Washington, I believe, was on a 17 or 18 game MacGuffin streak, but it is now the Michigan Wolverines who hold it.
So the MacGuffin is basically a WWE title belt that started hundreds of years ago. Well, not hundreds of years ago, 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And if your team beats this team, it's the transitive property. So how many times has Syracuse had the MacGuffin?
I've got the spreadsheet right here, so let me pull it up for you.
This is very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of other things you track. The Mr. MacGuffin Award is whoever was the, MacGuffin MVP. We've got Syracuse. Syracuse has held the MacGuffin a total of 4 times. Most recently, 2017, if you remember that victory over Clemson. I believe that Clemson was number 1 for that game.
Yep.
Number 2. Yeah, so they won that game and then lost it to turnover chain Miami just 1 week later.
Okay. Very, very interesting, the MacGuffin. So basically, from what I understand, the next team to beat Michigan is going to have the MacGuffin.
Yeah, that's correct, which makes it really interesting because Michigan has so much turnover. They could be significantly regressed this season. It's going to be a case of the MacGuffin being pretty wide open because Washington, like I said, they held that thing for all of last season during the regular season.
So does it always work out? I know this is kind of a close-ended question here, but does it always work out where the national champion holds the MacGuffin?
With the expanded playoff, it's going to become more common, obviously, but we actually had a kind of a drought. The last time it had been in the national title was 2020, and we had a drought there where it was in the SEC for a while. Then it went to the Big 12. Then Oregon had a nice little run that Washington stopped last season. So it was actually its first time in the national title game since 2020.
Very interesting. Well, Tyler, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing much. I just appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here, defend my takes. I'm not like some of those other Twitter guys, like Big Game Boomer and Blue Bloods bias. I've got actual substance behind my takes. I'm sure the comment section will be nothing but super friendly, glowing reviews of my takes. But like I said, I appreciate you having me on. I always love talking college football. I'm just passionate about the game in general. One thing we definitely share is our desire for the season to get here sooner.
Yes, we definitely do. It's just months away. I'm just waiting for August 31st. We're playing Ohio. And trust me, I'll be tweeting at you if Kyle McCord has 400 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Hey, that's the risk you run by having a national show. You miss on one team, you'll never hear the end of it. So I'm sure I'll hear back, if not from Syracuse, from some other ACC fan base.
If I promise you, if Syracuse wins, I don't think they're going to do this. I don't think they're going to go to the playoff or anything. But if they go to the playoff, your thing is going to be stapled on every single Syracuse thing, and it's going to be hilarious.
Which is so funny. I have my ACC power rankings. I don't know if you've seen just my ACC power rankings. I have Syracuse at 7th. I'm very familiar with their game and their schedule. I've been saying
also have them at the fool as a fool's gold, so to speak.
I have them as a fool's gold. I also have them as a 1 in a million playoff team as well. I mean, it's just whatever way you look at it. I just fool's gold only because so many people seems like are climbing onto the Syracuse bandwagon that it's careful. It's not a sure thing.
We actually kind of agree on that. I have them at 8-4, and I'm not willing to go higher. I will not go higher than 8-4 until I see this team go out and win football games. I do think there are some question marks, but that's probably our only agreement, is that we are not college football playoff 10-win bound. Tyler, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today.